Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday still for another hour, April 10th, 2025, episode 358, and we're going to talk about the easy bubble. I attended a funeral yesterday, and it was actually really pleasant. Earlier tonight, I'm a little bit late because I was at my kid's jazz concert, but anyway. But yeah, so the funeral, it was really pleasant. I had never been to a non-Korean funeral. I've done funerals here in America. I've attended funerals in Korea and very different. Uh, it's always very somber, no matter what. And but this funeral was actually really upbeat. Everyone seemed to know each other. It was packed in that church. And I found out later that the deceased had planned her own funeral. She prepaid it and basically chose who was going to give eulogies. And I thought, and she picked out all the hymns and all of that. And so it tells you something about the person, I guess. But yeah, it was an interesting time, and everyone who gave eulogies always spoke of faith. Now, you might not be a Christian, but I thought it was just really interesting from what I'm accustomed to saying on a Sunday or with people in my church, and then listening to how other people practice faith. It was very interesting. And I'm just going to assume what they call steel man argument. I'm just going to assume that everything everyone said was absolutely sincere. I mean, what do I know? Uh, but what they were saying was the very, very most simple trust in God. And I thought that was really interesting. And then I thought, as I was sitting there listening to them, I thought, wow, what kind of life would you live that, you could get away with having a very, very simple faith, right? So God is going to protect you, God is going to look after you. I thought it was really interesting, and it made me think about how in a bubble economy, it's hard to pick bad stocks, right? So when the bubble is inflating, everything is going up, right? So the rising tide lifts all the stocks. And not that I know much about it, but a lot of people talk about Kathy Wood and her ARK fund and how it was just, well, everything's going up. So it's kind of hard to um, pick stocks that don't go up. Not that I know anything. I'm just saying I've heard people say stuff like that. And I just file it in my head, put it away to try to find similar patterns other places. And so a lot of people have, and I don't know if you paid to opt out of a lot of advertisements. I do not, because I can't, I'm not going to spend my money on that. I'll just, try to skip the ad as soon as I can. But I see a lot of advertisements, people advertising their method to win big at the stocks. And it was just kind of an interesting thing, as a lot of people compare the stock market to a casino. And so you have basically winning strategies being shared with other people about how to make a lot of money off of stocks, which has no basis in understanding what's really going on. And for myself, I was burned by it 25 years ago with the dot-com bubble. And I realized that I had no idea what I was doing. And so I just pulled out and just decided that I was going to wait till I met someone or heard about someone that I could trust and who I believed in what they were saying. So when the bubble is, in other words, when the bubble is inflating, it might be an easy thing to feel wealthier as your portfolio is gaining value. So also then, the various beliefs in society are successful. In other words, they appear possible. they seem to be legitimate. And it's kind of a reflection of the times, right? So what people say they believe in is a reflection of the times. And as the economy is getting in this deeper into this bubble economy, pretty much anything says can appear to be legitimate to certain people, right? So certain ideas are not legitimate to a lot of people, but they are to a small number of people. And with the internet, virtue of the internet and being able to spread information, you have lots of different beliefs which will appeal to different groups of people. And they all seem to work to the people who subscribe to them. And when it's like on that level, you don't need to get too deep because a superficial understanding of what supposedly you believe in is enough, right? It's sort of like the rising tide of prosperity in the world lifts all boats. Well, it will even lift the boat of simple belief. So simple faith in God or anything, like simple faith in a good stock pick, for example. Even other beliefs like MMT, modern monetary theory, or magic money theory, as some people would call it, the wacky belief of endless wars will result in prosperity and happiness, or DEI will result in justice. This kind of, you know, uh, beliefs that are sustained by a bubble economy. But when the bubble pops, as it always does, then who or what else is taken down, right? So when the economic bubble pops, so instead of the rising tide of prosperity lifting all the boats, it's rather, okay, what gets sunk? Or better, the or the expression that a lot of people go with, who's swimming naked? When the tide goes out, you find out who's been swimming naked. So when the water is deep and the water is up to your neck, you don't know who's swimming naked. Everyone looks like they're they have a swimsuit on. And then when the tide goes out, then you're like, aha, you were swimming naked. So why do I say it like this when it comes to beliefs? Because everyone believes they got it right. Everyone believes that their personal belief, their personal religion, their thoughts on God or not God, it doesn't really matter. Science, uh, sociology, data collection, whatever it is that they believe they got it right. That's why they believe it. So right now, a lot of people are making fun of Trump on the reversals, on his tariff policies, tax on, tax off, all this stuff. And, they're having a good time making fun of other people's beliefs, right? Because right at this moment, everyone's beliefs seem to be equal to everyone else's. Now, and just as an outside observer who doesn't understand economics, doesn't think about Austrian economics, who doesn't think about freedom, but just goes by the general conventional wisdom. Everyone has enough ammunition to be able to poke fun at other people, right? But it's interesting that all these people who are making fun of Trump's reversals, right? Because there are so many of them, the most recent being the tariff reversals. They're the same people who supported everything that Biden was doing, the constant wars, the illegal immigration, flying illegal immigrants into major cities with no passports, right? DEI, student loan forgiveness, the funding of trans surgeries, lockdowns, stimulus checks, all these things. They're the same people. And so it's this kind of weird thing is like, okay, so what do you believe then? Because certainly all this other stuff is, during the Biden administration, that's not legitimate. These aren't actually rock solid beliefs as much as a lot of this weird, strange reversals that are going on in the Trump administration. I already attempted to offer what some people are saying about Trump's tariff policies and what is actually going on in his administration if we were to think of the best case, brightest, most hopeful scenario, which is very slim. Okay. But the belief in the belief scheme of things, right? Casual belief, stubborn belief, radical belief. They're all viable because of all the liquidity, all of the dollars that are sloshing around, right? In other words, because money is the easy money policy has been going on for so long. Not only are bad economic ideas hard to see, but bad beliefs are difficult to reveal, to suss out, if you will, because there's so much liquidity. So even if you are subscribing to a belief that has horrible losses, right? That you're incurring so many losses because the belief is so expensive. It's hard to know you are, right? Because there's so much liquidity, there's so many dollars floating around that you don't realize that what you are believing in, what you are engaging in is actually extremely wasteful and shouldn't be done at all. And so when the economy collapses and people have to tighten their belts, right? All the luxuries and non-essentials have to be cut, then you begin to see, oh, who actually had good beliefs and who didn't. Universities are closing. And in my area now, people used to say it had, I don't know if it's true or not, but people used to say that this greater city, urban area has the highest concentration of universities and post-high school education than any other place in the United States. But now many of them are closing and they're cutting professors, they're laying off professors. And so I talked to someone today about an adjunct job, a part-time professor position, and there are too many applications to even count, right? So I had applied, and they said they would look for my application. They couldn't find it. There's so many for a part-time position, right? I remember years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was on a hiring committee and there were four full-time spots open. We had 400 applications, 400 for four spots. And this was even before most people were thinking about a downturn in the economy, right? And so we're beginning to see a lot of life choices that people made confidently just a few years ago not turning out all that well. So beliefs, religion, faith, right? Faith and economic beliefs, modern monetary theory, Keynesian economics, Chicago school, Austrian school, all of these beliefs are now challenged when the economy starts to collapse or when the tide starts to go out. Everything that brought this bubble economy prosperity, fake prosperity, people will say, once it starts to deflate, once it starts to unwind, then a lot of the theories that a lot of people subscribe to, they don't work anymore. NGOs as a way of, non-governmental organizations, sort of a nonprofit organization going into another country, doing what needs to be done, seemed like a great idea for a long time, but now not so much, especially since Doge is exposing the fact that a lot of these NGOs are not actually performing the mission which has led to their funding. Charities, donations, a lot of these things dry up. And so if you are living with a charity, well, the money dries up. I'm a pastor of a church, and it's a very small church, and we got to watch every penny. And that's why I have to look for a full-time job outside of the church because I want to make sure that the church remains fiscally, without any problem, financially secure. So I'm not going to try to get a lot of compensation from the church. And so that's why I'm always looking for a full-time job outside of the church. Well, that depends on people being employed in the church. Otherwise, how do you pay the bills? And, just to let you know that this is not just conjecture, there are a lot of churches that are closing, right? The whole Cervasis lockdown thing, it deprived churches of that weekly revenue. And once they reopened, people didn't come back. And so they declared bankruptcy. A lot of churches declared bankruptcy. And so where's the God of their faith? Did he answer their prayers? Did that simple faith that people have, did it get them through the lockdowns? Did it help them explain what was going on during the lockdowns? In the same way, economic policy, does it help you explain what's going on in society? Does it explain where the trouble is coming from? Or are you going to live with your lack of understanding, pretend that everyone else is the problem, and just blame personalities? In fact, I think that the reason why you're going to put the blame on a demographic group, right, pin all of the problems on a kind of a racialization, right, like Trumpers or MAGA people, whatever, or Jews during World War II, right? When you pin it on a group of people, you're demonstrating your lack of understanding of what was really going on. In other words, your faith that you had before the economic trouble hit was insufficient. And now you're going to look for an alternate understanding, something that explains what is happening right in front of your eyes right now. And the easiest, no-brainer, ignorant thing that people go to is you pin it on a racialization, a group of people that you identify with a single characteristic, right? And I've talked about race many, many, many times. And that's what race is, a group of people, a categorization of people identifiable by a single characteristic. MAGA, right? Trumpers, anti-Trumpers, pro-Trumpers, whatever you want to call them, right? When you lack understanding, you're just going to blame a people group, a racialization, or a race. So make no mistake, the way that I teach at my church, I have a hard time in this environment, right? The way that I teach is great for the university, right? But it's not what people are expecting or even hoping for in a church. And so a lot of people left my church because they're like, what? What's this? Right? You're just supposed to tell me how God loves me, how anything that I do will be forgiven, and blah, blah, blah. Platitudes. Give me platitudes. And I can't do platitudes. Right. And if you've been listening to my sermons and I don't do this like, yeah, everything will be okay. So people ask, why go to a church like my church, which examines everything with a microscope, right? Where you can't hide the shady things that you're doing, or where I'll just talk about shady things and it turns out you're involved in some of these shady things. You don't want to hear it. And why not go to another church where no one talks about anything serious, right? So I always, compare, okay, so it's a lot easier to go to another church, but when the tide goes out, does it still work? So the Trump tariffs are revealing a lot of trades and deals which people had done for years, but were always dangerous, high, very, very risky, right? And as long as, the tide was rising, as long as there was a lot of liquidity, interest rates were low, then no one noticed. The better people than me in the ITM trading podcasts, Vince Lancy with Arcadia Economics and Monaco 64, they all mentioned that the hedge funds are in trouble because of the bond market, right? The bond market, which is the largest market in the world, is in trouble, right? But then the interest rates went up, right? It made interest rate going up makes the earlier lower interest rate bonds worth less than before. And so, in other words, a lot of people lost value out of their holdings, but they haven't marked it to market, right? The decrease in value has not been calculated or factored in. So, when there's a change in policy, there's a ripple through that strategy, which led to Trump pausing the tariffs. In other words, a lot of these hedge funds were in trouble and they asked Trump to put a pause because they were going down. But and so listen to those podcasts for better, more authoritative, expert interpretation. But I'm just saying that people are pointing to these things, which is leading to a lot of panic. And so when this happens, who has the right beliefs? Who has beliefs that will help them to weather the storm, that will help them to get over the hump, if you will, to get through the bad times and not have to change anything they believe, right? That's all going to be revealed, right? So, uh, what good is it if everyone around them, so you might think that you have, like people like me, we might think that, oh, we have a good understanding of what's going on. All right. We have different possibilities. We have a list of things that could be going on. And so we're preparing accordingly. But what good is it if everyone else around you, particularly in a larger city, they're not preparing at all and they're still living in that fantasy of the easy bubble, right? Everything is easy. Money is easy. Employment is easy. Well, that bubble is popping, right? It's hard to find a job now. In other words, the life that was made possible by the dollar, the strength of the dollar, the place of the dollar in the world, it's ending, and we're seeing the effects in every aspect of society. So when you have confidence in what you believe, say, for example, focusing on freedom, avoiding all these get rich quick schemes, then you keep on that path. You see the panic in other people, but you realize that you've been doing it, you've been living responsibly, right? And so when other people are panicking, you, not so much. But that doesn't leave you off the hook. You are still obligated to try to convince or to teach other people what is going on so that they can start to make adjustments. Look, I'm talking to young people all the time, middle schoolers and before that, college students. They don't have any money, but sometimes, and a lot of my college students, they listen to my lectures, the ones that I recorded, with their parents. And I'm hoping that in this way, and their parents look forward to listening to my lectures too. That was the freakiest thing. But anyway, the idea is to get the information out, to get people to start thinking so that these little nuggets of wisdom, right, will spread. That it's not about who's in office, who's president, right? Which war are we fighting? No, no, it's about freedom, right? Remember, governments don't learn. Only people do. And so we are obligated that if we have a line on a better belief, we have to try to convince and spread that information as much as possible. And it was all of this came to me while I was in that funeral yesterday, and I thought I would share and sort of inspire people to come up with ways. Like I've said this before, we know the people we love better than anybody else. We know what they're going to say. If I say A, they're going to say B, right? What I want them is to think about C. So how do I get them to start thinking about C? If I know they're going to shut me down if I say this thing, then think of something different to say, right? Uh, Come at them from a different angle, right? Cause them to start thinking. I know with some people it's near impossible, but you always got to keep trying because you love them and because what's coming is much, much worse than any of the behavior or the things that they could possibly say now. I mean, I really think whatever it is, and I have no idea what it is, it's going to be ugly. And we need people who understand that there's a bigger picture to be able to spread that awareness and wherever you are to start leading people out of that narrow-minded, you know, easy bubble and start realizing and seeing the world for what it really is, a very, very hard place. That's it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time.